Welcome to Stratford Mail from Stratford Hall Historic Preserve, where the voices of American history still speak. Find us online at stratfordmail.org and stratfordhall.org. It's season 3, and we have some fabulous stories for you as we lean into the 250th anniversary of the founding. Your job is to share Stratford Mail with everyone you know, and even folks you don't. Here now is our Vice President of Research and Collections, Dr. Gordon Blaine Steffi.
This month we explore how the Lee brothers mobilized the first organized, armed, and publicly signed association of resistance in the American colonies, marching on an arrogant merchant 260 years ago today. In March 1766, papers in Virginia and Maryland reported that the Sons of Liberty convened in Leedstown on the Rappahannock
to consider what measures it would be necessary to take against a man who was attempting to introduce a law so destructive to the community.
Those measures included the formation of a political fraternity willing to go to any extremity to prevent a break in the united front of noncompliance with the 1765 Stamp Act. The focus of this fraternity's rage was Archibald Ritchie, a Scottish-born merchant living in the busy port town of Hobbs Hole, present-day Tappahannock, on the Rappahannock River. As 1765 gave way to 1766, a frigid winter in the Old Dominion was made colder still by an economic freeze, meant to pressure Parliament and persuade them to repeal the Stamp Act, which had been in effect since November 1st, 1765. The stamp distributor for Virginia had effectively resigned his appointment after popular protests from the Westmoreland Courthouse to Williamsburg made him fear for his safety. Thus, neither stamps nor stamped paper were available. Courts were closed and ships idled in port without the required stamped paperwork to clear customs. For those whose livelihood relied on continually and routinely moving inventory around the Atlantic world, the situation was growing dire. Archibald Ritchie could ill afford to play the long game like those whose wealth was held chiefly in land, enslaved labor, and political office. Ritchie's commercial fleet idled at Hobbs Hole with holds full of perishable grain worth around 2,800 pounds sterling, an astronomical sum worth about $750,000 today. Desperate to offload the grain, Ritchie offered it at cost to local buyers. But with economic uncertainty afoot, no one was buying. Desperate to avoid a towering loss, Ritchie decided to break ranks. In late January, on Court Day in Richmond County, Ritchie claimed he knew where to acquire stamped paper, and he announced his intention to use it to clear his ships from port. The news spread rapidly across the Northern Neck. Richard Henry Lee would later write,
"This self-interested man says it will be hard on him not to send out his grain, but will it not be harder on the good people of Virginia to lose their liberty?"
But the first attempt to leash Ritchie was a local action on February 21st headed by Essex County VIPs William Roan, Ritchie's brother-in-law, and Francis Waring, who turned up at Ritchie's riverfront home on Prince Street with an irate crowd of roughly 70 locals, hell-bent on dissuading Ritchie from compliance with the Stamp Act. Precise details about what happened on February 21st are sketchy, and though it seems Ritchie did enough to pacify the men who had converged on his house that day, he hadn't done enough to pacify other more influential men around the Northern Neck. And Ritchie's reputation for arrogance did him no favors. On February 24th, Richard Henry Lee wrote to Landon Carter,
"As I was greatly surprised and equally disturbed at Mr. Ritchie's declaration at Richmond Court, so am I now pleased to hear from you that he repents of that dangerous step. I make no doubt but the great resentment of the people will be appeased when Mr. Ritchie shall show them in public his real sorrow for having offered so great an injury to the community and convince them of his determination not to make use of that detestable paper unless authorized by public consent."
In short, Richard Henry was happy for Ritchie to get back in line, but suggests to Carter that Ritchie needed to register his change of heart in the public square. Richard Henry was passing on to Carter the course of action his brother Thomas Ludwell Lee had outlined in a prior letter. After conferring with allies from Stafford, Loudoun, and Prince William counties, Tom wrote Richard Henry,
We have concluded that the most effectual and in all respects the most advisable method will be to pay Mr. R a visit and to insist on a declaration from him in writing, expressing the deepest sorrow for having formed so execrable a design, and promising in the most solemn manner never to use the stamp paper unless authorized by the Assembly of Virginia.
An object lesson was in the offing, and Tom assured Richard Henry that his allies were assembling what he called
a band of choice spirits
to carry the lesson home in Hobbs Hole. These choice spirits would be armed with swords, pistols, and firelocks in order to be certain, as Tom put it,
the infant struggles of freedom should not be exposed to the possibility of a defeat.
Tom detected a political opportunity in Ritchie's error and arrogance. He wrote,
R's profligacy is rather to be esteemed fortunate. The genius of liberty requires to be awakened, and this wretched Scotchman has afforded the sons of freedom a just occasion to rouse that generous fire, which is thought to be extinguished among us.
Tom wasn't the only Virginian ready to visit indignation on Ritchie's head. On February 22nd, Samuel Washington, George's younger brother, wrote emphatically to Richard Henry,
"The north side of the Rappahannock will not be passive,"
assuring him that
many are ready at a moment's warning to assist in anything destructive to him or his intentions. Please to inform me of the time and place when we may assemble and effectually prevent such destructive precedents.
Ritchie's decision to comply with the law of the land rather than the will of the community had stirred up a hornet's nest. Tom recognized that the moment was ripe for something grander than a single action venting community anger, and he closed his letter to Richard Henry with a fateful request.
This will be a fine opportunity to effect the scheme of an association, and I should be glad if you would think of a plan.
Let's pause to appreciate the stakes here. These men weren't proposing sternly worded petitions and impolite language. They were assembling a private militia to enforce non-compliance with the Stamp Act against the authority of the Crown. In so doing, they made themselves candidates for the noose on charges of treason. In his letter to Richard Henry, Tom suggested,
We propose to be in Leedstown in the afternoon of the 27th instant, where we expect to meet those who will come from your way.
And he asked his brother to conceive a plan of association. Richard Henry did exactly that. On the evening of February 27th, 1766, in Leedstown on the Rappahannock River, Richard Henry presented his plan of association to a steering committee drawn from the larger body of men ready to ride on Ritchie at Hobbs Hole. The plan was a formal pact of non-compliance with the Stamp Act, of enforcement of non-compliance, and of mutual defense. Today, the plan is known as the Leedstown Resolves, which was signed openly, not anonymously, by 115 men from 12 counties, including 6 members of the Lee family, 4 Washingtons, 2 Monroes, and 1 Mason. The signers open by acknowledging their duty of obedience
as far as is consistent with the preservation of our constitutional rights and liberty.
But where those rights are violated, and they hold them to have been violated by the Stamp Act,
we will go to any extremity, not only to prevent the success of such attempts, but to stigmatize and punish the offenders.
With their constitutional and moral framework established, the association moved on Archibald Ritchie. On February 28th, that's 260 years ago today, around 400 armed men crossed the river, rode into Hobbs Hole, and formed military lines outside Ritchie's home. Faced with a private militia and the imminent threat of the pillory, Ritchie grudgingly capitulated. And he read a public statement, no doubt dictated to him by the Lees, which was later reported in the papers.
Sensible now of the high insult I offered this country, by declaring at Richmond Court lately my determination to make use of stamped papers, and being convinced such proceeding would establish a precedent by which the hateful Stamp Act might be introduced into this colony to the utter destruction of public liberty. I do most submissively, in presence of the public, sign this paper, meaning to show my deep remorse for having formed so execrable a design. And I do hereby solemnly promise and swear on the holy evangelists that no vessel of mine shall sail, cleared on stamped paper, and that I never will make use of or cause to be made use of stamped paper unless authorized by the General Assembly of this colony. Archibald Ritchie.
Landon Carter's eldest son, Robert, was there that day and made this note in his daybook.
Just returned from Hobbs Hole, where I met a large company of gentlemen who assembled to compel Mr. Archibald Ritchie to sign a paper wherein he confessed his remorse at his declaration of his intention to clear out on stamped paper, and solemnly swore never in any manner whatever to use stamped paper. This he did in the most impudent way I ever saw anything done, although surrounded by about 300 men who were justly incensed at his behavior and who were all, most all, well armed.
The Lees had successfully orchestrated the first organized, armed, and publicly signed association of resistance in the American colonies. As for Ritchie, February 28th didn't break him, it flipped him. Ritchie retained his wealth, restored trust with his local community by becoming an ardent supporter of the Patriot cause. He was elected to the Essex County Committee of Safety in 1776 and used his merchant networks to advance the war effort in Virginia. As the Lee brothers and others gathered at Leedstown on the night of February 27, 1766, to sign Richard Henry's resolves, they did not know that a bill to repeal the Stamp Act had been introduced in the House of Commons 6 days earlier. The bill passed both houses of Parliament in early March, and the repeal was made law by George III on March 18th. But Parliament didn't repeal the tax without a massive caveat. On the very day George signed the repeal, Parliament also passed the Declaratory Act, a measure asserting Parliament's right to make laws and levy taxes on the American colonies in all cases whatsoever. This led Richard Henry to remark that
the nature of men in authority is inclined rather to commit 2 errors than to retract 1.
Indeed, jubilation over repeal was incredibly short-lived. But that is the story for another day. From Stratford Hall Historic Preserve in scenic Westmoreland County, Virginia, I'm Vice President for Research and Collections, Dr. Gordon Blaine Steffi.
Like and subscribe this podcast, share it with the world, and support programming like Stratford Mail by going to stratfordhall.org/donate. Your support means so very much.